In this, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth?
I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Well, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm glad you're here, right here on the AFR Talk Network. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Did I just say I was Crane Durham's? Well, I am. It's great to be with you. I'm a little jazzed up because I've been watching and listening to the filibuster of Ted Cruz on the Senate floor, and it's great. Great stuff. Talking about his dad, talking about opportunity. We'll get to all of that at the bottom of the hour. We're going to be talking to a Senate candidate from South Dakota and get her point of view on where she stands on it if she were a senator, where she would be on this issue. We will also give you a little more background on what exactly is happening in the second segment. But first, before we do all that, I want to get to what the president said this morning at the United Nations regarding Iran. Are we going to change our posture? Are we going to fall for the negotiation ploy and allow them to develop a nuclear weapon while we chat? President Obama had this to say. Roll it.
And just as we reviewed how we deploy our extraordinary military capabilities in a way that lives up to our ideals, we've begun to review the way that we gather intelligence so that we properly balance the legitimate security concerns of our citizens and allies with the privacy concerns that all people share. As a result of this work and cooperation with allies and partners, the world is more stable than it was 5 years ago. But even a glance at today's headlines indicates that dangers remain. In Kenya, we've seen terrorists target innocent civilians in a crowded shopping mall, and our hearts go out to the families of those who've been affected.
Well, right there, you know that was talking not about Iran, but how we're more stable than we were 5 years ago. Very interesting claim, I believe, that is not backed up by the history. We're going to ask Ryan Morrow in just a moment about that, of the Clarion Project, clarionproject.org. But that does lead to what we are speaking to. If the world's more stable, and I guess Al-Qaeda's on the run, and Osama bin Laden's still dead, I'm just going back to the campaign. I think of Benghazi and a whole host of things. Most recently, obviously, front and center are the attacks in Pakistan as well as Kenya, specifically Nairobi and the mall. That said, what about Iran, which is the number one state sponsor of terrorism, second only to Al-Qaeda, with American blood on their hands, developing a nuclear weapon? The president said this. Roll it.
I want to be clear. We are encouraged that President Rouhani received from the Iranian people a mandate to pursue a more moderate course. And given President Rouhani's stated commitment to reach an agreement, I am directing John Kerry to pursue this effort with the Iranian government in close cooperation with the European Union, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China. The roadblocks may prove to be too great, but I firmly believe the diplomatic path must be tested. For while the status quo will only deepen Iran's isolation, Iran's genuine commitment to go down a different path will be good for the region and the world.
Mandate from the people. Does he not realize that the Ayatollah picked all the candidates and there are no moderates there? I mean, the mandate from the people, a different path. What is he drinking? With respect. Okay, with respect. On the line with us right now is our good friend Ryan Morrow. He is the National Security Advisor for the Clarion Project, clarionproject.org. And Ryan just played the clip about reaching out to Iran and the idea of a mandate from the Iranian people to change course, and that would go to a dialogue. I was deeply troubled by it, and it takes me to someone I know you're familiar with in some way, certainly, because of the fact that this man probably reads what you write because he knows a lot about national security. That's why I say that. It is the former mayor of New York, Mayor 9/11 himself. That's right, Rudy Giuliani, asked about if President Obama should shake the hand of the Iranian president and talk with him. Roll it.
I don't believe this is the point at which he should be shaking hands with him. There should be a lot more demanded of Rouhani. Rouhani is a person who's been responsible for the murder of thousands of people. We think he's responsible for murdering 52 Iranians in Iraq on September 1st, dissidents and has seven hostages headed there. This man has a lot of blood on his hands. He should be required to go through a couple of steps before he gets to talk to the president. Yeah. Like he should be willing to give us an inventory of all of his nuclear facilities. Like he should start dismantling them, and we should have inspectors there, and the inspectors should start inspecting so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Right. Last time he threw them out.
Sure.
First, Ryan, will you address the mandate from the Iranian people? And second, do you agree with Mayor 9/11 himself, Rudy Giuliani?
Sure. If the Iranian people's will was actually actualized, if it was actually implemented, then the regime wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have Supreme Leader Khamenei currently leading. You probably wouldn't even have Rouhani as president. The simple reason that he won the election is just because he was perceived as being the most moderate of the Mullah-approved bunch. Not any candidate can just run just because they have political support. Many candidates are banned from participating unless they have a proven allegiance to the regime. So the elections in Iran are more like a political party primary than they are a general election. And one of the things that really disturbed me about the speech this morning was how President Obama seemed genuinely optimistic that he could deal with Rouhani. It seemed heartfelt. And yet we have text from a speech he gave in 2005 and also video from interviews where he had said the same thing, where Rouhani flatly said, we just need to engage in diplomacy with the West, be nice to them, and then we can split their ranks, split Europe from America in order to have minimal sanctions, and then eventually our nuclear program will advance to the point where the West just accepts it, and then they'll lift the sanctions.
Ryan, surely the president has access to that information, and yet he is optimistic about being able to do what that was, to engage in the strategy or play into the strategy that was outlined. So what are we missing here? Does the president know something we don't?
I'm not convinced that he actually knows about that 2005 speech. And that's because the president's a very busy guy, and so everything goes through a very tough filter. And so the information he gets is from the advisors around him and from those that brief him. And so it's questionable to me whether this 2005 speech where Rouhani openly talked about deceiving the West and just stringing along America until they had a nuclear program fully completed, that may not have even reached the top levels. And even if it did, you'll still have some advisors that believe that Iran is essentially the same thing as the Soviet Union, and they have the president's ear, and so they'll find a way to say that their opinion is still correct despite this speech.
Well, first and foremost, will you tell us where we can locate this, and we'll get it posted up, because I know clarionproject.org is a tremendous resource, especially with you as a national security advisor. That's one. Two, would you promise me you'll send it to him?
Yes, I'll call him tonight, and I'll let him know that I'm going to fax it to him. But, yeah, you can go to clarionproject.org, type in Rouhani, Rouhani, and then you can get the article there about how the Iranian opposition has actually tied Rouhani to a specific hidden nuclear site. And you pull up that article, and you can see in there that there's quotes directly from the text, which is publicly available, and then that'll be up on your Facebook. I can send it to you once the interview's over.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that it once again allows me to point out when we do have guests on this show, especially the likes of Ryan, who is a regular guest, he's not making this stuff up. He's done his background. He's a tremendous journalist, and he has expertise in what he speaks of. So we are blessed to have you. All right. Tell me, the Syrian situation with weapons, I'm actually going to call an audible with my team here, and I believe that would be cut B13, if I'm not mistaken. on the Syrian weapons, specifically what President Obama addressed this morning at the UN, and what he had to say about it's not B-13, go to B-11, and we can get that going. Here's what he had to say, Ryan, about those weapons and working and partnering with Russia. Roll it.
We believe that as a starting point, the international community must enforce the ban on chemical weapons. It's an insult to human reason and to the legitimacy of this institution to suggest that anyone other than the regime carried out this attack. However, as I've discussed with President Putin for over a year, most recently in St. Petersburg, my preference has always been a diplomatic resolution to this issue. The Syrian government took a first step by giving an accounting of its stockpiles. Now there must be a strong Security Council resolution to verify that the Assad regime is keeping its commitments. And there must be consequences if they fail to do so.
What do you think the chances are that there will be a UN resolution with consequences, and that would be the possible use of military force? Ryan?
That's not going to happen unless Assad does something extremely stupid that makes world opinion so enraged against him that Russia is somehow forced to go along with the resolution. I don't see that happening. Russia's condition is that there should be a UN resolution that threatens consequences, but that it should not mention military force. And early on, I don't know if this is still their position, they wanted the resolution to explicitly rule out military force. So that would put handcuffs on us. And so I just don't see it happening. And by the way, there's intelligence coming in from Syrian opposition sources and from Arab media sources that Assad is already hiding chemical weapons. Shortly after the agreement was announced, I started getting information indicating that chemical weapons were in the process of being moved to Lebanon, to areas that are controlled by Hezbollah. There's a report in the Washington Free Beacon indicating that some chemical weapons have been transferred to Hezbollah. There's a report in the Lebanese media saying that some chemical weapons have been put in trucks that are filled with vegetables before they are sent over to Lebanon. And then, of course, we know that about 20 trucks crossed over into Iraq that may have had chemical weapons. Oh, one more. According to a senior Syrian opposition figure, there are chemical weapons being loaded onto Russian ships right now. So they're already preparing for these inspections.
All right. Well, we have an agreement. And agreements, you know how they've worked out in the past. Peace in our time, my brother. Tell me something. What about the Kenyan attack, the attack in Nairobi, the mall attack? What did it tell us about Al-Shabaab and as well as Al-Qaeda?
It tells us that we have to shift our understanding of Al-Qaeda to focus more on these affiliates, that they may not be capable of carrying out a 9/11 style attack unless they're incredibly lucky, or if they have the help of Hezbollah or a state sponsor, but they can still carry out attacks like this. And in some way, that's actually more dangerous, because if you have a 9/11 type incident once every 10 years, it's terrible to deal with, but the U.S. can handle it. But if you have a more frequent wave of attacks on shopping malls, on ports, on stadiums and things like that, that becomes much harder to grasp with economically and even psychologically. And I think what's important to note here is that according to CNN, quoting sources from Al-Shabaab, the terrorist group, at least 3 of the attackers were Americans. And now the information that is coming into my email and other people's email indicates that number might be as high as 6 now. They believe that they've tracked these Americans from Maine, Arizona, from Minnesota, and elsewhere across the country. And Al-Shabaab did that for a reason. They wanted to show off the fact that they're able to get this many American recruits into their ranks and capable of carrying out terrorist attacks.
Well, obviously, we got to have you on tomorrow to detail that story as well. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time as always. Great to be with you. Ryan Morrow, National Security Analyst, Clarion Project, clarionproject.org. On the flip side, the filibuster, Obamacare, defunding, and a potential a candidate, AFR Talk.